Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Have you ever been so sure that something just wasn't right, but you couldn't exactly tell what was wrong? You're afraid, but not exactly sure why. Sometimes it's the feeling you get when you find yourself in a basement full of secrets. And what happens when you uncover those secrets? Scary, but now your fear has some teeth. It wasn't the dark or just the fact that it was a basement that were terrifying. More the fact that underground, you're closest to whatever else might be underground. And it's that whatever else that's terrifying. Personally, I'd like to hear more. So, let's get started, shall we? Back when I was younger, I remember going to my grandma's house to celebrate holidays or general family get-togethers. You know, the usual stuff. As far back as I can remember, I always had the weirdest feeling being in her house, more specifically, the basement. I remember any time I'd even come close to the stairs that led to the basement, I'd get the most unsettling feeling. I couldn't even set foot on the stairs without feeling as if something was going to come out of the shadows and get me. Through the years, every time I'd visit Grandma's house, that unsettling feeling about the basement would remain. I always chalked it up to silly childhood fears of the dark and the basement. This was far from the case. One day, me and my cousin decided we'd be brave and go into the basement. We ended up going into a bedroom down there, and as we were looking around, we noticed writing on the wall inside one of the closets. It was in green ink and read, "I told you I would die before I turned 16. This spooked us, to say the least, so we ran upstairs and we told our parents. They ended up telling us the truth about the house, the dark history. My mom said that long before my grandma moved in, there was a family that lived there and was rumored to have abused their children and locked them in the basement. My mom said that the writing has been painted over several times, but it keeps coming back through. This chilled me to the bone, knowing I was standing right where someone may have died and their ghost had come back to send a message to their abusive parents. As I grew older, I never got over my fear of that basement. Anytime I would stay with Grandma, she'd offer me the basement bedroom and I refused. I know something was in that basement from beyond the grave. As my grandma got older, she had to sell the home and move in with family. I just hope the new owners never find out what happened there. When I was 16, I lived in the Valley area of Los Angeles. This was many years ago. At this time, the best part of my week was Saturday nights, when I'd meet my friends at our beloved under-21 nightclub to dance the night away. The vast majority of the time, I'd have to get a ride there and back. I didn't have my own car until a couple of years later, when I was in college. But occasionally, a family friend would lend me his car. And on one of these Saturday nights, he did. I felt so independent and free to be able to take myself to the club and to be able to leave when I wanted. On the night of this story, I drove to the club and had a typically great time, dancing with my group of friends to music like Prince and Earth, Wind & Fire. At the end of the night, I got into my borrowed car and headed towards home. In case you don't know, the San Fernando Valley is made up of many suburban towns. None are really small and some are very nice. As you'd expect, some are less nice with higher crime. I lived with my family in a medium town in the northern part of the valley. It was neither very nice nor very bad, with medium homes on mostly respectably, if not professionally, manicured lawns. And being the greater Los Angeles area, there were many differing routes that I could take to get home, whether freeways, highways, or city streets. It was after midnight at this time, but most routes that I could take would still be bustling on a Saturday night. I'd had my fill of loud music, laughter, and chattering voices, so I opted for the quieter route home. I took some busy streets, then veered into some quiet neighborhoods that would take me home. If I drove through some quiet house-lined streets, I'd get home a little faster, and I was tired. GPS hadn't been invented at this time, nor even cell phones, so I had to rely on maps or just knowing the chosen route. I'd heard bad things about a town called Pacoima, but I'd only been through it during the day, maybe once. Still, I knew how to get through to shave a few minutes off my time, and besides, being someone used to walking or taking buses, I felt blissfully perfectly safe now in a well-running car, gas in the tank. I was safer at this moment than at almost any other time. At least, that's what I believed. Still, I was a teenage girl, alone, after midnight, in an area I was unfamiliar with, and naive enough to think nothing bad could happen to me in a locked car. I entered a residential street in Pacoima, and I only had to go a couple of blocks to get to the next town, then to my own. As I slowly drove down a dark, quiet avenue of modest homes, there were streetlights illuminating the unknown. This also helped with my feeling of invincibility. As I smiled to myself at this, I started to notice a few people walking down the street towards me. At first, I didn't give it much notice. My left turn out of Pacoima was coming up, just ahead, anyway. But as they got closer, I very quickly realized it wasn't just a few people. It was a gang of approximately 12 to 15 men, and they weren't casually walking down the sidewalk. They were aggressively running down the middle of the street and right towards me. I suddenly had to slow to almost a stop so as not to hit anyone, and this is when they all got a real good look at me. Looks which turned instantly more excited and animated as they all realized I was just a young girl, alone. Many exchanged smiling glances between them, and others were whooping and whistling and calling out things to me.
Somebody's in trouble.
Smoothly, effortlessly, as if they'd rehearsed it ahead of time. Several of them stopped me completely by standing in front of my car, even putting hands on the hood, as others walked around to my driver and passenger doors and pulled at the handles to open the doors. I didn't always lock the doors when I drove, and cars didn't have an auto lock back then, but I was thanking God that I'd had the foresight to do so on this night. Of course, it all happened very fast, but in my shock and terror, it felt like slow motion. But so quickly adjusting my mind from carefree to possibly being abducted or worse by this large group of men. They had me trapped. I couldn't drive forward nor reverse, because at this time, the car was completely surrounded by men, and as a couple of guys picked up sticks or other objects to try to bust the windows, I knew I had to think clearly and act fast. I did the only thing I could think of. I started driving forward. Having blocked my car completely, I could see the surprise on their faces as they knew they had to move out of the way or risk being run over. I immediately decided that if they didn't move, I would run them over. All the men standing in front of the car jumped out of the way, and I sped up as I took the left turn out of Pacoima. I did make it home safely, but my heart didn't stop beating out of my chest for the rest of the night. Of course, I thought about it for a long time after as well. I felt proud of the way I'd handled the situation, but I just kept running through possibilities of what I could have done differently or what could have gone differently. What if they didn't get out of the way and I actually hit a couple people with the car? How would I have lived with myself? Should I have just sat in one place and honked the horn to hopefully wake people up in the homes around me? What if one of the men had pointed a gun at me? I'm very happy that it turned out the way that it did, but it could have turned out so much worse. I hope we'll all keep in mind that we're not quite invincible inside of a car, no matter how cozy the heated leather seats make us feel. Dark, quiet shortcuts are not a good idea, especially late at night. And always drive with your doors locked. So Pacoima gang that tried to grab and do who knows what with a teenage girl driving alone one Saturday night. It's been a long time since then, and I'm very glad I didn't meet any of you ever again. This story happened years ago. Me and my friend at the time liked to explore abandoned buildings. In my hometown, there were these series of buildings used as old war veteran hospitals. They've been abandoned since the 60s, I believe, and have fallen into despair. Many people would sneak in and vandalize the place, so it became a regular spot for police to patrol, and this made it difficult to get in. Anyways, me and my friend one night decided to try to get in. We ended up finding a broken window in the back of one of the buildings, and we climbed in. The place was pitch black, and we only had small flashlights. Walking down the long hallways, we could see broken glass everywhere, and just an immediate feeling like you were being watched or followed. There was a long hallway that we were going down with doors on either side, all the way down. At one point, we split up, and I went down the hall, and my friend went the other direction. As I was walking alone, I would flash my light into each of the rooms as I passed by. There were wheelchairs and hospital beds, and all manners of graffiti. At the last door in the hall, I turned and I looked into the room, and I swear on everything, there was a black figure, towering right in the doorway. I know what I saw, and I swear, it didn't have eyes. The eyes were just dark, sunken holes. I remember panicking. I just turned back and ran as fast as I could, yelling for my friend that we had to get out of there, and I told him something was in one of these rooms. We both ran out of there as fast as we could and never went back. I don't know what it is that I saw, but it was definitely scary, whatever it was. I'm a firm believer that most U.S. Navy vessels are haunted for a plethora of reasons. I've heard countless sailors share their own personal experiences on board different ships, so here's mine. I've been in the Navy for a little over a decade, and the majority of that career has been spent on the night shift. Well, one night, Myself and 4 other fellow soldiers were working in the wee hours of the morning. Working hours were 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. We worked on the 7th deck in the engineering space. Well, one of us was called up to the main deck for some reason, so he left. I watched him go up the ladder well. There's only one way in and one way out of this space. Only 3 or 5 minutes after his departure, the hatch to the pump room, adjoining the space that we were in, bursted open like someone was pissed off. Those of us left down there looked at each other, remembering the hatch was dogged down. 2 seconds later, the guy who left seemed to be walking in the adjoined space. There's 4 ballistic windows where you can see between the space. He almost floated. I always say he looked like he was riding a skateboard. He looked at none of us and then disappeared. Sketched out, we all went to investigate, only to find an empty pump room. Freaked out, we ran back in and called the office asking for this person, the guy who'd left. He was still up there. Days later, we decided to shut the lights out in the pump room and take flash pictures. The majority were lame and vacant until we got to the back corner, where we captured a face staring at us on top of a toolbox. I don't know where the image is today, as I didn't take the picture, but it still haunts me. It was smoky and very clearly looking straight at us. Other than that, people have been shoved, seen old men in old uniforms walking the P-ways, and even hear people walking up aggressively behind them on the deck plates when no one else is around, myself included. Ships are most definitely haunted. I've only talked to about 3 people about this incident, largely because I feel as if it's my fault somehow. In 2018, I was hanging out with a friend that I wasn't supposed to be with. So for the sake of secrecy and ease, I told my 17-year-old sister to drop me off at the old elementary school and then have them pick me up from there. Nothing weird happened. We hung out, and then I told them to drop me back off at the elementary school at midnight, the time of their curfew, and my sister would come get me. I was almost 15 at the time, and though we had moved about a 15-minute drive from our old school, it wasn't in a bad area. I used to live in Utah, specifically the Sandy area in the middle-class neighborhood, though we weren't middle class. It was a quiet neighborhood, full of Mormons, and I never truly had any scarring experiences. It's important to note that despite being nearly 15, I probably look anywhere from 9 to 12, as I was on the shorter side, and I truly didn't hit puberty until about 15 and a half. When we pulled up to the school, there was a hatchback white car that was driving around rather recklessly, such as speeding it around in reverse, doing spin-outs and stuff like that. It was driving in circles around this curb that split off the drop-off zone in a small faculty parking lot. I sat with my friend in their car for a second, expressing my concerns about the car, and they assured me that it was just a stupid teenager. I didn't say much more about it and said my goodbyes and got out of the car. The way the school is set up is that there's a large brick building, and when looking head-on at the school, there's a small opening to the left that leads back towards the playgrounds. The faculty parking lot is about 20 to 30 feet from the entrance of the school. When I got out of the car, I sat by the main office doors that would lead into the school, right underneath a bright light. I needed to put my shoes on. I don't remember now why I hadn't done it before. The car stopped in the faculty parking lot. Not in a parking spot, but in the middle of the central lane. Cautiously, I got up after successfully securing my shoes on my feet, and I stared at the car. As I said earlier, I'm easily anxious. A man, hard to describe as he was backlit by a streetlight, got out and started walking towards his now open trunk. I watched as he paused and pulled something out of his trunk and paused. Though I couldn't really see his face, I knew he was staring at me as he said, "I'm sorry for whatever happens to you. It's not your fault." I didn't say anything in return and ran toward the back of the school, and I kept running until I hit a large portable, hiding behind it and peering around toward the drop-off area. He must have gotten back in his car as he pulled out of the parking lot. The back area of the school is large. In the far corner, there's a back exit onto a large steep road that goes down. I tried to call my sister a few times, but after she didn't answer, I called my friend. I made my way toward the back alley and exited onto the road. Just then, as I crossed the small side street, the car turned onto the road. He saw me, probably as immediately as I saw him, and I ran down the road, hanging up on my friend. When I reached the bottom of the hill, there was a house on the corner, and I cut through their grass, and I stood on their stoop and rang their doorbell once. The car stopped at the corner, still on the street with the large hill. He rolled down the window to talk to me.
"I'm a police officer. I wanted to know if you need any help,"
the man said, leaning slightly onto the center console, presumably so I could hear him better. I insisted I didn't need help and I was okay, but the man kept insisting I come to the car. Of course, I didn't. After about 30 seconds, he left. The people in the house opened their door, and I was crying. It was a middle-aged man and his wife. They also had a dog, it seemed. I explained the situation about the car that was chasing me, and I got my friend who dropped me off on the phone. My friend is absolutely the worst at directions, and as the wife tried desperately to give it to them, it didn't seem to be getting anywhere. The car came back as the two were sitting at the stairs with me. I started freaking out as it drove slowly by the house. All I could say was, "That's them. That's the car." The man walked down his drive with the dog, but the car sped away. Eventually, my friend found their way, and the woman walked me up the hill to their car. I couldn't thank them enough. I went home and notified the police, but nothing ever came of it. I don't know what that man's intentions were, but I can clearly tell that they weren't positive. In September, my partner and I signed the lease on a dream apartment. I was ridiculously excited and kept telling everyone I knew all about it, to the point where I was probably actually pretty annoying. One day, a friend of mine came to visit me at work, and of course, I told her the news about our new place. She asked where it was, and when I told her the location, she turned pale and seemed uncomfortable at best, and flat out scared at worst. She asked to see a picture of the inside, and when I showed her, she let out a long sigh of relief, then proceeded to tell me one of the creepiest stories I have ever heard. It turns out that about 5 years ago, she'd lived in the house directly next to mine, with her sister and boyfriend. Starting almost immediately when they moved in, they began hearing noises out in the kitchen area at night when they were sleeping, and occasionally woke up to open cabinets or kitchen tools scattered around. Eventually, they started hearing what sounded like kids talking in low voices in the kitchen at night, occasionally crying and crashing sounds far off, but still somewhere in the house. Around this time, my friend and her sister started to fight a lot, said that they'd both been feeling extremely irritable about everything. Their house was broken into while they were all at work one night, but nothing was stolen except some cheap costume jewelry. There was cash, valuable jewelry, and designer clothing in the house, but it was all left untouched. Later in the same month, they received a visit from the cops, who said a neighbor had called about screaming and crying coming from the house, and had reported that they left their kids there alone when they were out. They didn't have kids. The cops were called a few other times and finally got a search warrant, and somehow ended up finding a trap door under the kitchen window area that was covered in layers of leaves and dirt. They found out that it was the remnants of a very, very old root cellar. I live in one of the oldest cities in America by European colonizer standards, and much of the structures are built on top of older structures. Apparently, one thing led to another in the search down there, and the police recovered some very, very old skeletal remains of 2 children. Nobody seemed to know if the skeletons or the root cellar were there first. During all of this, my friend and her sister broke their lease and moved out of there ASAP, as they were terrified to be there any longer. I went through with my lease and lived in the building next door to where all of this happened. My apartment is an old adobe market that was converted into an apartment in the 1970s. And it's been an absolute dream to live here. No scary vibes or noises at all. The couple who live in that house now seem pretty nice and keep to themselves. We all have high adobe privacy walls and coyote fences. And I feel tempted to see if they know about all of this, but I'm afraid that it might make them uncomfortable if I approach them about it. So this happened a while ago. When I was 17, my girlfriend was 16 at the time, and we were asked if we could babysit for my cousin, who couldn't. We obliged when money was involved, obviously, and we went to the house at about 2 p.m., and everything was all right. It came to be around 1 a.m., and we were wondering, when were the parents going to be home? So we tried to message them. However, no reply. We thought to ourselves, they must be too drunk, but they should be on their way soon, hopefully. We were warned prior to babysitting that there had been a few things that had occurred in the past, such as people threatening to smash windows, people attempting to kick the door down and get in, and so on. We thought nothing of it at the time, just said to ourselves, it won't happen whilst we are there. We were mistaken. Around 1 a.m., I heard a noise outside. I turned to my girlfriend who was on her phone, asking if she heard it. She said, "No, you're just hearing things," and brushed it off. About 10 minutes later, I was bombarded with glass. A brick had flown straight through the window, landing on the sofa next to me. I went outside to see if I could find the person who did it. However, they must have already escaped, or so I thought. A little information about this house. On the left-hand side, there was an alleyway leading into both the back garden of the house and the neighboring house. It was pitch black. However, being the brave person I thought I was, I turned on the flashlight on my phone to look down the alleyway. As I did, I may have shit myself, as I saw someone in a black hoodie crouched down in there. We stood there, frozen, staring at each other, felt like an eternity, before he finally threw himself towards me at full speed. I said to myself, "Fuck this shit," and I ran into the house, locking the door behind me, hands shaking. When I got back in, the kids were already downstairs wondering what had happened, and my amazing girlfriend was there to comfort all three of them, telling them it's nothing, even though they were probably old enough to know what had happened. She started to clean up the mess while I was on the phone with the police, fearing that the person was still waiting outside. The police came within minutes, took our information, and told us they would patrol the area, keep an eye on the house until the morning. About an hour later, the police knocked on the door again and gestured me to follow him to his patrol car. When I got to the car, I saw a man sat in the back seat, handcuffed, and was asked, "Is this the person who smashed the window?" I analyzed the person from head to toe, and he fit the description I gave police entirely. The parents finally got home and were obviously worried about their children's safety. However, the kids were fine, and they thanked us, paid us, and we went on our way home at around 4 a.m. A few days passed, and it turns out it was the mother's crazy ex, who had intentions to kill her. However, she was not home. And when he was taken into custody, they found a knife in his pocket. I still get chills when I think about the night. What if I tried to be brave and fight the guy? I would 100% be dead or seriously injured. I know this isn't really scary to most people, but if you've ever been in a similar situation, you understand just how terrifying it is. So you'll have to forgive spelling errors and the like. I'll try to clean this up as I go. I'm writing this on my phone at work, and still a bit shaken up. So let me preface this by saying I'm an overnight guard at a hospital. I've been here about 5 years or so. Overall, I've been working night security in various settings for about 12 years. Before that, I was a Marine. My point is, I'm used to odd situations and the general bumps in the night. The hospital where I work has had its fair share of weird shit happen, as many old buildings do, but nothing too crazy. Tonight was different, though. Part of the job is patrolling and unlocking this one really old building, as in one of the first buildings in the city. It's currently used as the College of Nursing, but at night, it's deserted. Well, about 3 a.m. or so, it's peaceful in the hospital, so I wander over and get the unlocks out of the way. I'm in this building a lot, probably 2 to 5 times a week, every week, for the last 5 years. I've gotten used to the creepiness, and I honestly kinda like the quiet. Tonight was odd, though. As soon as I approached, I got this odd feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was that feeling of being watched by a predator. Anyone who's spent time in the woods knows the feeling. Your hackles raise, so to speak, and your mind screams, "Get out of there." I stop outside and scan the street behind me in the courtyard I'm standing in. Nothing obvious, but I can't shake the feeling. I go inside and lock the doors behind me, a note to unlock them last. That feeling doesn't go away, though. As I'm walking the floors one by one, it only gets worse as I move toward the older parts of the building. Now I know I'm the only one in this building. I've been all through the first floor, and all of the entrances are locked up tight. You can only do that with a key. As I get into the upper floors, though, I start hearing things. It starts with footsteps. Hard to tell because it's like they're matching my cadence. What gets my attention is that it sounds like hard-soled shoes, not like the boots I'm wearing. I turn back and search the halls, but absolutely nothing. Then I hear a door slam from the hall I just came from. I run back. Maybe it took me a couple of seconds to the door. Nothing. It opens to an empty auditorium, which I thoroughly search. Still nothing. At this point, I shrug it off, old building and all. Maybe the pipes were clicking and I thought footsteps. Maybe I missed a door being open and it rattled closed as I walked by. I continue on, with that feeling getting stronger and stronger. I'm in the stairs to the 4th floor, and I'm taking a second to breathe and mess with my phone. I hear a door below me slam shut, and the distinct sound of footsteps echoing in the stairwell. I pull my radio to call dispatch and let them know that someone's in the building. It beeps telling me the batteries are dead and won't call out. Shit. I call on my phone, and dispatch says they'll send some guys. I wait, but I'm not hearing any more footsteps. No doors, no sounds at all. I walk all the way back down and back up to the 4th floor and find no one. Now I'm second-guessing myself and anticipating the coming jokes on my behalf. I move along, figuring I'll finish the last floor and work my way down, meet up with the other guards. I open the door to the 4th floor, and everything is different. I'm not talking about a change in atmosphere, anything like that. I'm saying that the entire floor, which consists of old offices used for storage and whatnot, is completely different. White painted walls now have wood paneling. The clutter is gone, replaced by old lab and medical equipment, filing cabinets instead of boxes. The biggest change? At the end of the hall, in each corner, are 2 leather-bound chairs and 2 men sitting in them, talking to each other. They stop and look at me as I stand there holding the door in stunned silence. I blink, and it's all gone. Right back to normal. I don't understand it. One second it's completely different from the hundreds of times I've stepped onto that floor. Next second, poof, back to normal. Instinctively, I try my radio again, remembering the battery's dead as I hit the button, and it works. I call out that I'm on the 4th floor and I need units up there as I start to check through each office. Of course, everything's normal when everyone gets there, and I'm still left wondering, what the hell just happened? We finish checking the building and I catch my fair share of bullshit from the other guys. I go down to dispatch because I know we have cameras on those floors, and I want to know what happened. I get to dispatch and we review the cameras. We see the door opens as I come in. Then the feed freezes entirely for about 8 seconds. Not necessarily unusual, but not very common, especially on those cameras. It tends to happen in more commonly traveled areas. So the dispatcher, a man who's been here since grass first sprouted, asks me what I saw. I describe it to him and he says, "Weird. That's how it looked back in the 80s before they redid the lower floors, and those were all labs for the college." At this point, I'm just speechless and decide to save myself from further embarrassment and say, I must just be tired and seeing things. I know that's not the case, though. I'm wide awake and I know what I saw. I know what I heard through the rest of the building, too. I just don't know how to explain it. Everyone has their weird experiences in that building, but man, this one really threw me. I worked armed security in Colorado Springs, and a few months ago, a contract ended that we had for a couple of years. The contract was overnight front desk and building monitoring for a community transitional apartment building. More simply put, a stepping stone apartment building for working homeless people waiting for public assisted housing. I haven't worked at this location since last summer, 2021, and the contract ended early 2022. Primarily, we were hired because overnight, some people caused trouble, be it homeless from the shelter next door, less than deserving tenants conducting illegal business, or standard issues involving apartment buildings. Security was limited on what we were able to handle, as the building was run by the shelter, and leasing was through DHS and the state. I asked to be pulled after a 2-month rotation working there twice a week, because hey, staring at cameras and walking a small 4-story building for 12 hours at a time is boring. Now to the meat and potatoes of the post. While working there, I got to know a really cool older guy named David. David was a veteran that ended up getting caught up in drugs and alcohol when he got out of the military in the 80s. Though he was homeless for most of his adult life, David never asked for handouts, but instead worked off any debt he felt needed. Even though David was clean from drugs and alcohol for over a decade when I met him, he was suffering from that lifestyle in his old age. But despite his failing health, David got a job working at a deli that's located at one of my company's overnight patrol services properties. A few weeks ago, as I was checking out the shopping center where the deli's located, I noticed the light on inside the deli, and the dumpster behind the store had movement. I checked it out to find David standing next to the trash bags, smoking a cigarette. After a brief friendly chat, catching up, I told David I had to get back on the road, but I'd be back later in the night. Happily, he acknowledged, but asked if I could do him a favor and bring him a fresh pack of Newport Reds, as he would be there for a while. I agreed, and he said, "I just wanted to thank you for being kind to me." 2 hours later, I returned with the cigarettes and a gas station fruit pie. As I came behind the deli, I saw a food delivery truck and a couple of his coworkers unloading. I parked and walked up to them, asking if David was still there. Confused, the men replied that David was dead. Upset, I replied that was not funny. But the men said seriously that David died just after Valentine's Day. He was on his way home from his shift at the deli. It was a heart attack. Not believing what the men were saying, I stopped at the transitional apartment building on my way to another property to drop off the cigarettes. At the front desk, the new security confirmed what the men at the deli said. The new security then stated that since he had no next of kin or a will, his apartment was just emptied earlier that week. It's now been about 5 weeks since I saw David at the dumpster. And when I'm working patrol on that side of town, I stop and have a smoke with my old friend, even if I can't see him anymore. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode, but don't miss a brand new episode every Friday night. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks to all of you for listening. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to The Darkest Hour, and tap the bell so you never miss a thing. I appreciate all of it, and I can't thank you enough. Huge shout out to all of my patrons for their unwavering support. MISANTHROPIA, Monica L., The Dark Cosmos, Zoe Watt, Rat Girl, ALISHA S., and our newest patron, Shelly B. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, you can join my Patreon too. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour. Learn more about the perks of joining. You can follow me and keep up with all things Darkest Hour over on my Instagram @thedarkesthouryt. I'm also going to attempt to try to use Twitter again, so if you're on there, follow me @AmandaJaneTDH. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.